What's up, everybody? Tonight I'd like to talk to you guys about assurance. I don't know about you, but I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I have experienced a lot of failure, and as a result, I have had insecurities and doubts that God could ever use me for anything insignificant or anything significant. And I don't think I'm alone. Every person struggles with fear and insecurity that is caused by something. Maybe it's caused by a sin in your life. Maybe it's caused by a disability in your life. Maybe it's caused by a past traumatic experience in your life. Whatever that is for you, it's there. And it causes you to be unsure of your worth and your ability to be used by God. It shouldn't. Assurance is something that we not only need, but we can have because of what God has promised us in His Word. Time and time again, the Bible tells of people who are unqualified to do anything of significance, but yet God chose those very people to show His strength and His power in light of people's and the world's depravity. Time and time again, God chose people that were unqualified and used them for culture change. Just listen to some of the people who should have been disqualified from the beginning and God used to do something incredible. Noah, he was a drunk. Abraham, he was too old. Jacob was a liar. Joseph was abused. Moses had a speech impediment. Samson was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Elijah was suicidal. Peter denied God's very existence, and Lazarus was dead. You see, none of us are qualified to be used by God, but because of God, none of us are disqualified from being used by God. Jeremiah 29:11 says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Believing this with just our mind, with not just our mind, but also our hearts, is the key to assurance in Jesus Christ. Out of these examples from the Bible and from the examples that I just gave you, the story of Moses is where I want to begin my focus. I think that he shows us a lot about what it means to have assurance in God. I believe that every person can achieve assurance in their lives by understanding three promises that God shows us through the story of Moses. One, the first promise is that God has a plan for our lives. I'm adopted. I was adopted at the age of 2.5. And it's taken me a long time to turn that experience into recognizing God's mercy and God's deliverance in that situation. For a long time, I felt like that was some sort of failure on my mom's part, or it was bad parenting. But as I have grown, I have learned that it is actually God looking in that situation and providing deliverance and giving me a plan and a path for a better life. From the very beginning, that actually happened with Moses as well. He was from the tribe of Levi. He immediately went from rags to royalty and was placed and found by Pharaoh's wife and placed in royalty there in Egypt. And after a while, there was one day where he saw a guard beating up on an Israelite slave. And he asked him to stop, and he wouldn't, so he ended up killing him. And after guilt, he decided that he would run away and he would begin another life. And so he made refuge with Jethro and his followers and actually began an entirely different life. But God was not finished with Moses. God sought relentlessly Moses. And in Exodus chapter 3, we see where God finally catches up with Moses. So here we are, and God tells him what his plan is for his life. Let's read Exodus 3, 7 through 10. Then the Lord told him, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have now seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You see, your plan may not be delivering an entire nation out of slavery, but as we also have just read in Jeremiah 29:11, God does have a plan for you, not just Moses, but for every one of his children who are willing to surrender their lives and to follow him. So God has a plan for your life. Secondly, there's a saying. It's actually based out of 1 Corinthians 1:27 and 28. And it says that God does not call the equipped, but that God equips the called. That means it's okay if you don't feel adequate. That's because you're not adequate. You're human. You make mistakes. But God, as you allow God through a relationship with him to show you his path for your life, you begin to have his plan for you unfold in front of your very eyes. 5 times Moses gave God a reason why he either shouldn't go or why he was unqualified to go. And each time, God comforted him. In Exodus 3, verse 13, it says, "But Moses protested, 'If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them?' God replied to Moses, 'I am who I am. So say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you.'" Again, in chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "But Moses protested again, 'What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you?' Then the Lord asked him, 'What is that in your hand?' 'A shepherd's staff,' Moses replied. 'Throw it down on the ground.' The Lord told him, so Moses threw down the staff and it turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. Then the Lord told him, 'Reach out and grab its tail.' So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. 'Perform this sign,' the Lord told him. Then they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, has sent you." One more time. "But Moses pleaded with the Lord, 'O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I am not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled.' Then the Lord asked Moses, 'Who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord?' And then lastly, Moses again pleads with the Lord and says, 'Send anybody else.' And the Lord became angry with Moses. 'All right,' he said. 'What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he is on the way now to meet you.' Each time Moses had a fear or a doubt or an insecurity, God comforted him and reassured him that it was God moving through Moses, not Moses' qualification, that allowed him to be ready for the task at hand. You see, God does not just call the equipped. God uses unqualified people and equips them for something supernatural. And then lastly, and we learned this in the beginning of Exodus chapter 3, when you look at the burning bush, it's that God is bigger than human problems. Time and time again throughout this story, you see, and it helps with our assurance, you see that God responds to a human problem, to an earthly problem, in a God way. If you go back and you read the very beginning of chapter 3, it talks about there an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. The only way that the bush that wasn't engulfed in flames is because God said so. So another way to read that would be, the bush did not engulf in flames and burn to ashes because God said so. You see, time and time again, through the insecurities and the failures and the fears that Moses had, God responded with something that only a God could respond with. He said, "What about my inadequacies? Or what if they don't believe me?" And God said, "Oh, well, let me provide for you a snake out of a staff. Let me provide for you water that turns into blood. Let me provide for you all of these different signs and wonders. Let me provide a skin-eating disease that can then be healed immediately, just to prove to the people that I am who I am has sent you." And so God is bigger than our earthly problems. And so as we look back on these 3 promises that God has shown us through the story of Moses, the first one is that God had a plan for Moses' life. The second one is that God equipped Moses for his journey. And the third one is that God was going to be there solving human problems with God's solutions. And he has promised that he will do the same for us. And now, I don't know about you, but after this evidence has been proved, I don't know or presented, I'm not sure how you can be assured in anything else except for the one that is bigger than the world's problems, that has promised that he has a plan for our lives. No matter what kind of mistakes or insecurities or failures you have, you serve a God that is bigger than that. And so rest assured that you are not disqualified from anything that God wants you to do. And so it's not our job to ask if we're qualified, but it's our job to ask God, what is it that you have called me to do in this life? And as we do that, we will time and time again live a life of assurance. So, what are you waiting for?